The mocking shouts from across the street hit me like a slap as Theodore and I stood in our front yard unrolling the large blueprints for the community we dreamed of building. You two think you can turn this decent neighborhood into your little gay paradise? One of the neighbors yelled, his voice carrying over the fence, and several others laughed loudly in agreement, but instead of shrinking back, I felt a fire ignite in my chest. This was the moment that sealed my determination. Theodore squeezed my hand tighter, his palm warm against mine, and in that instant I knew nothing they said could break what we were about to create. We had been planning this for months, turning the empty lots behind our house in suburban Columbus, Ohio, into a safe haven where gay couples could live without the constant weight of stares and whispers, without the fear that one wrong look at the grocery store would cost them their peace. Calvin had spent my whole adult life carrying the scars of my own coming out at 18 when my father told me to leave the family farm and never come back, my mother crying but not stopping him. Those years alone in the city taught me that love needed walls, sometimes not to hide but to protect. Theodore had been my anchor since we met at a quiet support group 5 years ago. He with his steady job at the university library and his gentle way of listening that made every problem feel solvable. We bought this house together 2 years ago thinking we could finally breathe easy in a neighborhood where kids rode bikes and flags waved on porches, but the flags were always the same colors, and the whispers started the day we hung a simple rainbow sticker on our mailbox. Now the blueprint showed small cottages, shared gardens, a community hall where couples could gather without explanation. I wanted to give others the home I never had growing up. As we rolled the papers back up, Theodore whispered, "We do this together no matter what," and I believed him with every part of me. That evening, the neighborhood Facebook group lit up with posts about the two men next to the park who were ruining property values, turning families away. Comments poured in, some joking, some vicious, calling us agenda pushers, but each one only made my pen move faster across the notebook, sketching more details. I stayed up late that night while Theodore slept, his breathing steady beside me, thinking about the first couple who had already spoken to online, a young pair from Cincinnati scared to hold hands in public. They deserved this space, and so did we. By morning, the Mockery had spread to a few yard signs down the block, crude drawings and words that stung, but I walked past them head high, carrying coffee to Theodore in the kitchen. He looked at me with those kind eyes and said, "You are the bravest person I know, Calvin," and in that moment, I felt ready to fight for every inch of this dream. The weeks that followed brought more planning meetings at our dining table, late nights, calculating costs per minutes, and the quiet joy of imagining laughter filling the future gardens instead of silence. My boss at the architecture firm noticed my distraction, but I kept the details close, not wanting to risk the promotion I had earned through years of overtime. Theodore and I took walks in the park, holding hands openly for the first time in our own neighborhood, and though a few cars slowed down, no one said anything to our faces yet. Inside, though, the pressure built, my mind replaying my father's last words, "You will regret this life," and wondering if building this sanctuary would prove him right or finally prove him wrong. I chose to believe the latter every single day. The first interested couples started replying to our discreet online posts within days, and Theodore and I met them one by one in coffee shops on the edge of town to keep things low-key at first. There was Marcus and Jamal, a teacher and a nurse who had been together 7 years but moved 3 times because landlords found excuses to deny them leases. Then came Elena and her girlfriend. No, wait, the post specified gay male couples, so we adjusted, but the stories were the same everywhere: isolation, fear of being outed at work. I listened to each one, feeling my own chest tighten with memories of sleeping in my car the first winter after leaving home. Theodore took notes, his calm voice asking questions that made everyone feel seen, and by the third meeting, we had 4 solid prospects ready to sign letters of intent once the permits cleared. Back home, we celebrated with takeout on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky orange, and for a moment the neighbors' silence felt like victory. But then my parents called out of the blue, my mother first, her voice shaky, asking if the rumors were true about some project turning the block upside down. I tried to explain it was just a few homes for friends, but Dad grabbed the phone, his tone sharp. "You always had to push, Calvin, always making it harder on everyone." The call ended with him hanging up and me staring at the phone until Theodore wrapped his arms around me from behind, whispering, "They don't understand, but we do." That night I lay awake, the old rejection mixing with new doubts. Was I being selfish, dragging Theodore into this when he had a stable life and a family that at least tolerated us? He had told his parents about us years ago, and though they sent cards on holidays, there was always that careful distance, no questions about our future. The next day at work, a colleague pulled me aside, saying he heard from someone in the neighborhood that I was stirring trouble, and maybe I should keep personal stuff personal if I wanted that promotion. I smiled through it, but inside the words burned. Theodore and I drove to the lots that afternoon, measuring with tape and dreaming out loud about where the shared kitchen would go, where couples could cook together without fear. A car slowed down, the driver staring, but we kept working, hands brushing as we marked spots for flower beds. That evening, the first real confrontation came when Mr. Johnson from across the street knocked on our door, his face red, asking what the hell we thought we were doing bringing that element here. I stood tall, explaining it was private property for consenting adults, but he cut me off with a laugh, calling it a circus and warning that good families would move away. Theodore stepped beside me, his voice steady. "This is our home too, sir, and we have rights." The door closed and we leaned against it, breathing hard, but I felt stronger than ever, the mockery turning into fuel. We spent the rest of the week finalizing the proposal for the city planning board, Theodore handling the legal language while I drew elevations that showed open, welcoming spaces. My sister texted me a long message saying Mom was crying again and Dad was talking about cutting me out of the will completely. I read it aloud to Theodore, and we sat on the couch in silence for a long time before he said, "Your family chose fear, Calvin. We choose love." The online group grew to 6 couples, now all sharing stories of eviction threats and family ultimatums, and each message reminded me why the blueprints mattered. One night, after a particularly harsh comment thread in the neighborhood group, I broke down in the shower, the water hiding my tears, but Theodore joined me, clothes and all, holding me until the shaking stopped. We talked until dawn about the cost, the real price of visibility, and though fear lingered in his eyes, his decision was clear. We moved forward together. The city hearing was scheduled for the following month, and as we mailed the application, I felt the weight, but also the purpose, every step forward, proving that love could build something lasting even when the world pushed back. The community information session at the local library hall was supposed to be small, just our prospects and a few supporters, but word spread fast, and by 6 o'clock the room was packed with neighbors, some curious, some already angry, holding printed flyers with our names circled in red. I stood at the front with Theodore beside me, the projector showing the renderings of the cottages and gardens, and I began speaking, my voice steady, describing how this would be a private development on our own land, benefiting the whole area with increased property care and community events open to everyone. A man in the back stood up shouting, "This is how it starts, with special treatment, then our kids are exposed." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, and cameras from a local news crew flashed in the corner, the story suddenly bigger than I expected. Theodore fielded questions calmly, explaining zoning laws and how no public funding was involved, but the tension rose when Mrs. Patel from 2 blocks over asked if we were trying to create a ghetto. I answered that we were creating safety, not separation, but the room erupted in arguments, some defending us, some demanding the city stop it. Outside afterward, a small group of protesters had gathered with signs reading, "Protect our values and keep it traditional," and as we walked to the car, one man spat on the ground near my feet. The drive home was quiet, Theodore gripping the wheel tighter than usual, and when we pulled into the driveway, he finally spoke. "This is getting bigger than we planned, Calvin. Maybe we slow down." His words hit hard because part of me wondered, the same was I endangering the man I loved most for a dream that might never fully come true. That night, news clips aired showing our faces blurred but names clear, and my phone buzzed with messages from old college friends, some supportive, some asking what I was thinking. My boss left a voicemail requesting a meeting first thing Monday, and I knew the promotion was slipping away. Theodore and I argued softly in bed, not yelling, but the kind of careful words that revealed cracks, his fear of losing the quiet life we had built, my insistence that backing down now would mean living in the shadows forever. By morning, we reconciled with coffee and a promise to face the hearing together, but the internal storm raged on. The following days brought more harassment, anonymous notes in our mailbox calling us sinners, and a few cars honking late night. One of our potential residents, Marcus, called to say he was getting cold feet after his workplace heard rumors, and I spent an hour on the phone reassuring him that this was exactly why the community mattered. Theodore watched me with worried eyes and later admitted his own parents had called urging him to talk sense into me. The moral weight pressed down. Was it right to ask others to risk their stability for my vision, or was I just repeating the rejection I had known by forcing change too fast? Yet every time I looked at the blueprints or held Theodore's hand, the answer felt clear. We could not retreat. The city planning board meeting was 2 weeks away, and we prepared packets of support letters from the couples who stayed committed. One evening as we sat on the porch, a neighbor kid about 12 rode by on his bike yelling something about fairies before pedaling away fast. And though it was just a child, the words cut deep, reminding me how early the prejudice started. Theodore pulled me close and said, "We are building something better for kids like that too." And in his arms, the doubt eased enough to keep going. The pressure from family intensified when my sister showed up unannounced, begging me to drop the project for Mom's sake. And I listened to her tears but held firm, explaining that hiding had never healed anything. She left angry, and the house felt emptier, but Theodore and I cooked dinner together, talking through every scenario, the best and worst outcomes. Sleep came hard that night, filled with dreams of the community finished, and full of laughter, only to wake to more online comments calling me a homewrecker. Still the fire burned brighter, the mockery, no longer breaking me, but forging me into someone who refused to look away. Harassment turned personal when we woke to find our mailbox smashed and spray paint on the garage door reading "Go back where you came from." Theodore called the police while I stood staring at the red letters, feeling the violation like a punch to the gut. The officer took notes, but his sympathy felt thin when he suggested maybe keeping a low profile would help. Work became unbearable, my boss pulling me into his office to say the firm could not afford the negative attention, and though no formal warning came, the promotion talk vanished. I drove home that afternoon, the radio playing happy songs that felt mocking, and found Theodore packing a small bag, his face pale. We had our first real fight, then voices rising as he said maybe we pause the project just until things calm, and I accused him of giving up on us on everything we believed. He left to stay at a friend's for the night, and the empty house echoed with my regrets. Alone, I sat with the blueprints, crying for the first time in years, questioning if my drive was worth losing the only person who had ever chosen me fully. The moral dilemma tore at me: was I being a hero, or just a stubborn fool sacrificing love for an ideal? The next day, a mutual friend, Ryan, who had seemed supportive, called to apologize, saying he had mentioned our plans at a bar and neighbors overheard, but I sensed more when online posts suddenly quoted private details only he knew. The betrayal stung deep. Ryan had been at our house many times, shared meals, and now his gossip fueled the fire. Theodore returned that evening, eyes red, and we talked for hours, the kind of raw conversation that strips everything bare. He admitted his fear was not just for us, but for the life we had built, the simple nights, the shared future. I confessed my terror of becoming like my father, closed off and angry. We held each other until dawn, the reconciliation deepening our bond even as the outside world pressed harder. Vandalism continued to rock through the window one night, and social isolation as invitations to block parties stopped and former friendly neighbors crossed the street. My family sent a certified letter outlining conditions for any contact, including dropping the project, and I read it aloud to Theodore, feeling the old wound reopen. Yet, at the quiet moments, we kept planning, revising the design to include security features and community guidelines that emphasized respect for all. One of the couples, Jamal and Marcus, visited in person, bringing food, and their presence reminded us the dream was bigger than the pain. The city hearing loomed, and we practiced our presentation late into nights, the tension making every word sharper. Internally, I wrestled with the right and wrong of it all. If fighting for acceptance meant tearing at the seams of our relationship, was the greater good truly greater? Theodore sensed it, and one morning over breakfast said we choose each day, Calvin, not just once, and that simple truth steadied me. The neighborhood association sent a formal complaint to the city citing moral concerns, and though legal experts said it would not hold, the public pressure mounted. I lost a client at work due to the news coverage, and the financial hit added another layer of sacrifice. Through it all, the mockery from across the street continued. Daily comments yelled as we left for work, but each time I lifted my chin higher, the resolve growing into something unbreakable. Theodore and I planted flowers in the backyard that weekend, a small act of defiance, and as we knelt in the dirt side by side, the future felt possible again despite the cost. The relationship crisis peaked when Theodore found an old email from my ex on my laptop, a harmless catch-up message, but in the heat of everything, it became the spark. He accused me of hiding things, of putting the project before us, and I defended myself too sharply, saying his doubts were the real problem. He packed a bag again, this time leaving for a week at his brother's place 2 hours away, and the silence in the house was deafening. I spent days replaying every argument, every moment of doubt, wondering if my vision had blinded me to the man I loved. The internal conflict consumed me. Was I selfish for pushing this when Theodore had never asked for the spotlight, or was retreating the greater betrayal of our shared values? Friends distanced themselves, one even unfriending me on social media after a heated exchange, and the isolation amplified the self-doubt. Work suffered more, my performance review delayed indefinitely, and bills piled as legal fees for the permits mounted. I drove to the lots alone one afternoon, sitting on the ground staring at the marked spots and questioning every choice since we unrolled those first blueprints. A text from Theodore came late that night, simple and raw: "I miss you, but I need space to think," and I replied with the truth: "I miss us too." The days blurred into nights filled with long walks and journal entries, pouring out the moral tangle of activism versus personal peace. Then the ultimate family ultimatum arrived, my mother calling to say Dad had suffered a mild heart scare, and the stress from my choices was to blame, though doctors said otherwise. The guilt landed heavy. I visited the hospital alone, Theodore still away, and Dad barely spoke to me, his eyes filled with disappointment that cut deeper than words. On the drive back, I pulled over, crying the weight of generations of expectation crashing down. Betrayal deepened when Ryan posted a public comment on the news article, siding with the neighbors claiming I had pressured him into supporting the project. The lies spread fast, and even some of our prospects hesitated, calling to ask if the drama was worth it. I reassured them, but inside I wavered. Theodore returned on a rainy Friday. We sat on the couch, the distance between us feeling like miles, until he spoke first. This fight is changing us, Calvin, but I don't want to lose you. We talked through the night, unpacking every fear, every sacrifice, the way his support had wavered under pressure, and my single-minded drive. Tears came, and forgiveness followed, the kind that rebuilds stronger. We made love that night, not in passion, but in quiet reaffirmation, the emotional connection deeper than before. The next morning, we faced the yard together, the spray paint still visible, but our hands linked. I realized then that the true cost was not the neighbor's words, but the moments I had let doubt creep between us. The community plans evolved during his absence. I had added a counseling space for couples facing family rejection, and showing Theodore the changes brought back his smile. We attended a small gathering with the remaining prospects, sharing stories of survival, and the room filled with a sense of solidarity that reignited the spark. Yet the moral question lingered: was it fair to ask the man I loved to pay this price, or was love itself the reason to keep fighting? The city hearing was days away, and we prepared with renewed unity, the internal storm calming into a steady determination. The public town hall debate turned into a battlefield, the auditorium packed with 200 people, signs waving on both sides as the planning board called our name. I stood at the podium, the microphone amplifying my voice as I presented the revised plans, emphasizing privacy, safety, and economic benefits. But the opposition was fierce, speaker after speaker painting us as threats to children and traditional values. One woman cried about protecting her family, another man called it an invasion, and the room cheered. Theodore sat in the front row, his eyes locked on mine, giving me strength when my hands shook. Then came the personal attacks, a neighbor reading aloud old social media posts, twisted out of context, and my own father surprisingly in attendance, standing to say his son had always chosen the hard way. The words landed like blows, and for a moment I nearly broke, the near defeat tasting bitter in my throat. I responded with quiet dignity, sharing my story of rejection, and how this project was about healing, not harm, but the board members' faces remained neutral, the vote scheduled for later. Outside afterward, protesters chanted, and a few shoved past us, one whispering threats that made Theodore pull me closer. The drive home was heavy with silence, the cost now clear: lost family ties, damaged reputation, and the very real possibility the project would be denied. That night we held each other, the emotional toll evident in Theodore's quiet tears and my own exhaustion. I questioned everything, the rightness of dragging us into this arena when a quieter life was possible. The following days brought more fallout, my sister blocking my number, work colleagues avoiding eye contact, and one of the couples withdrawing, citing safety concerns. The betrayal from within the community hurt most, but the remaining four stood firm, their loyalty a lifeline. A surprise call from an old mentor offered legal help, and we met him at a diner discussing appeals, and writes the conversation reminding me that progress always faced resistance. Theodore and I spent evenings reviewing every document, the moral weight pressing, but our bond now forged in fire. The board meeting for the decision was set, and as we waited, the internal awakening began. I saw that the fight was not just for cottages, but for the right to exist openly. Family pressure peaked with a letter from my mother, begging me to choose peace over pride, and though it stung, I wrote back explaining that true peace came from living authentically. The neighbors continued their campaign, door-to-door petitions and online petitions gaining signatures, but each signature only hardened my resolve. In quiet moments, Theodore and I talked about the price, the lost friendships, the strained holidays, and yet the love that remained made it bearable. The day of the vote arrived, the room tense, and when the board announced approval, with conditions, minor adjustments for parking, the victory felt hollow against the personal losses. We celebrated quietly at home, but the awakening was clear. This was only the beginning. The real work of building and defending the sanctuary lay ahead. Theodore and I stood in the backyard, the sun warm on our skin, as we reviewed the final blueprints, the ones that had survived every storm. He turned to me, his eyes shining with a new certainty, and in that moment the reconciliation felt complete, deeper than before the crisis. An unexpected ally appeared when the neighbor's teenage son knocked on our door one evening, confessing he was gay and scared his parents' reaction and asking if the community could help him. We invited him and listened for hours, and his story mirrored mine so closely that the purpose crystallized. We helped him talk to his family, and though tense, the conversation planted seeds of change. The moral dilemmas resolved into clarity. The sacrifices were not in vain if even one person found safety. We broke ground the following week with the 4 committed couples and volunteers from a local LGBTQ center, the shovels hitting dirt, a symbol of resilience. Family ties remained strained, but my sister reached out tentatively, and I accepted her call, the door cracking open slightly. Work offered a lateral move, not the promotion, but enough to keep us stable, and I took it, grateful for the stability. The relationship with Theodore flourished in the building process, late nights, planning gardens, shared decisions that strengthened our partnership. Confrontations continued, a heated exchange at the hardware store with Mr. Johnson, but this time I responded with facts and calmed the mockery, losing its power. The internal growth was profound. I no longer questioned if the fight was selfish, but saw it as necessary love in action. One evening as we planted the first trees, Theodore said, "This is our legacy, Calvin," and the words filled me with peace. The community took shape slowly, foundations poured, walls rising, and each milestone brought joy mixed with a memory of the costs. An old friend who had distanced himself apologized over coffee, admitting fear had guided him, and though forgiveness came slowly, the circle widened. The awakening peaked when we hosted the first informal gathering in a half-finished hall, laughter echoing where silence once reigned. Theodore and I watched from the side, hands linked, the vision alive. Yet challenges persisted, zoning inspections and funding shortfalls, but each hurdle taught patience and unity. My father's health improved, and though no apology came, in neutral text arrived, the smallest bridge. We chose to keep building the greater good, no longer abstract, but the faces of the couples moving in soon. The moral question transformed from doubt to conviction. The right choice was the hard one, the one that honored love by creating space for it to thrive. The cottages stood finished, white siding gleaming under the Ohio sun, gardens blooming with flowers planted by the residents themselves, and the community hall hosted its first official dinner with laughter and stories filling the air. Calvin and Theodore, we had done it. The sanctuary reeled despite every obstacle. The neighbors still muttered, but their voices faded against the reality of happy couples living openly. Marcus and Jamal moved in first, followed by the others, each bringing their own scars and hopes, and watching them settle brought tears to my eyes. The price paid now measured in these moments of belonging. Theodore and I sat on our porch, overlooking the new homes, our hands intertwined, a relationship stronger for the trials, the love tested and proven. Family visits remained rare, but my sister came for Thanksgiving, bringing cautious acceptance, and even Dad sent a card, the handwriting shaky but present. Work stabilized, the controversy dying down as the project proved beneficial. No property values dropped. In fact, the neighborhood gained a reputation for quiet community spirit. Betrayals like Ryan's faded into lessons about choosing allies wisely, and the internal conflicts resolved into a steady purpose. We hosted open days for the wider town. Some neighbors crossed the street out of curiosity, others stayed away, but the walls we built were never meant to exclude, only to protect. One evening as the sun set, painting the sky in pinks and golds, Theodore and I walked the paths between cottages, greeting residents and feeling the weight lift completely. The sacrifices, the lost friendships, the family strain, the relationship test had all led here to this living proof that determination could reshape the world one home at a time. Yet the story was not over. New couples inquired daily, and the work of maintaining the haven continued with community meetings and support groups. I reflected often on the journey, the mockery that had ignited the fiercest resolve, the choices that defined us, and the awakening that true strength lay in vulnerability and persistence. As we stood in the backyard where it all began, the blueprints long since framed on the hall wall, I knew the price was high, but the reward immeasurable. Theodore kissed my cheek and whispered, "We did good, love," and in that simple truth, the future stretched bright and open. Was it right to pursue this community despite the profound personal costs to family relationships and inner peace, or does true love sometimes require choosing a quieter, safer path instead?